Jon Moxley just sent the most chilling and dreadful message in WWE history directly to Paul Heyman after his shocking return, and if you're not absolutely terrified by the lunatic fringe's promise of violent retribution for the wise man's years of manipulation, you clearly don't understand how personal and dangerous this situation has become. What we're witnessing isn't just typical wrestling threats, this is genuine hatred manifesting as promises of systematic destruction that is Paul Heyman genuinely fearing for his safety. The sight of Jon Moxley delivering his message with that unhinged look in his eyes, describing in graphic detail exactly what he plans to do to Paul Heyman as payback for years of perceived wrongs, sent shivers down everyone's spine. This wasn't the controlled intensity of a wrestling character, this was raw fury from someone whose hatred for Heyman has been building for over a decade and is now exploding with terrifying consequences. Paul Heyman, you manipulative parasite, I'm back, and I'm coming for you. Every lie you told, every person you manipulated, every career you destroyed for your own benefit, I'm going to make you pay for all of it. Moxley's words weren't just threats, they were promises of violence delivered with such conviction that even skeptical fans believe he genuinely intends to hurt Heyman badly. You want to talk about personal feuds that transcend wrestling storylines and feel genuinely dangerous? Jon Moxley didn't just call out Paul Heyman for a verbal confrontation, he issued graphic threats describing specific acts of violence he plans to commit, creating legitimate concern about whether this crosses lines between entertainment and actual assault planning. The history between these two men makes this threat absolutely devastating and deeply personal. Paul Heyman was instrumental in Jon Moxley's early career development, but their relationship deteriorated into bitter animosity over creative control, broken promises, and what Moxley views as years of psychological manipulation and exploitation. But here's what makes these messages absolutely terrifying and different from typical wrestling promos: Moxley didn't deliver them in a WWE ring with cameras in production. He recorded guerrilla-style videos from undisclosed locations, creating an atmosphere of unpredictability where he could strike Heyman anywhere, anytime, without warning or protection. The most shocking aspect of these messages was the specific detail Moxley provided about Heyman's daily routines, favorite restaurants, travel patterns, and personal habits. I know where you eat breakfast, Paul. I know what time you leave your hotel. I know you're never actually safe, and that fear you're feeling right now? That's just the beginning. The stalker-like knowledge was absolutely chilling. Here's a question that's going to reveal how seriously people take these threats. Did the level of personal detail about Heyman's private life make you uncomfortable, and does it cross the line between wrestling storyline and genuine harassment? The actual content of Moxley's threats was so graphic and violent that WWE reportedly debated whether to even air portions of his messages. Descriptions of barbed wire, broken glass, concrete floors, and making Heyman bleed until he begs for mercy created genuine concern about whether this was appropriate content or actual threats that should be reported to authorities. But the most devastating aspect was Moxley's explanation of why he hates Heyman with such intensity. You spent years getting inside young wrestlers' heads, making us believe you cared about our careers while really you were just using us as pawns in your political games. You destroyed people who trusted you, and now someone who knows all your tactics is going to destroy you. The revelation that Moxley views this as justice for not just his own treatment but for every wrestler Heyman allegedly manipulated over decades adds a righteous fury to his threats. He's positioning himself as an avenging angel punishing a career manipulator, which makes his violent intentions feel justified in his mind. Quick question for the wrestling psychology experts: does Moxley genuinely believe he's serving justice by threatening to hurt Heyman, or is this just extremely committed character work that blurs the lines between reality and performance? The most infuriating aspect for Heyman supporters is that Moxley is systematically destroying the wise man's carefully crafted reputation. You want everyone to think you're this brilliant strategist, this legendary manager, but I know the truth. You're a coward who hides behind bigger men and manipulates from the shadows because you're too weak to fight your own battles. The investigation into the validity of Moxley's accusations reveals a complex history with some legitimate grievances mixed with potentially exaggerated claims. Former wrestlers have corroborated that Heyman could be manipulative, but the extreme nature of Moxley's hatred suggests personal issues that go beyond normal professional conflicts. But perhaps the most shocking element of these messages was when Moxley addressed Heyman's family directly. Your wife, your kids, they're going to watch me destroy you, Paul. They're going to see the man they thought was so smart and powerful reduced to a broken mess begging me to stop. That's the legacy you're leaving them. The decision to involve Heyman's family in the threats escalated this situation to extremely controversial territory. When someone threatens that a person's children will watch them suffer, it crosses from wrestling heat into genuinely disturbing personal attacks that make many fans uncomfortable. Here's another question about boundaries: was Moxley wrong to reference Heyman's family in his threats, or is everything fair game when you're trying to create the most intense feud possible? The most disturbing footage came from Moxley's final message, filmed in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse with chains, weapons, and blood-stained concrete visible in the background. This is where it ends, Paul. This is where I drag you to face consequences for everything you've done. No cameras, no referees, no protection, just you, me, and justice. The implication that Moxley wants to fight Heyman in an unsanctioned environment without rules or safety protocols creates legitimate concern about serious injury or worse. When someone is threatening to drag a 58-year-old non-wrestler to an abandoned location for violence, it stops being entertainment. The testimonies from people close to Paul Heyman reveal he is genuinely afraid of Jon Moxley in ways he's never been scared of any wrestler before. Paul has dealt with dangerous guys his whole career, but Moxley is different, one source revealed. He believes Jon is actually capable of crossing lines that others wouldn't cross. The investigation into whether WWE can legally protect Heyman from these threats reveals complex questions about where performer safety obligations begin and end. If Moxley's threats are part of a sanctioned storyline, WWE has responsibilities, but if they're personal grievances outside of work, the legal situation becomes murky. But the most important consideration is whether Jon Moxley actually intends to physically harm Heyman or if this is extraordinarily committed method acting designed to create the most realistic feud possible. The ambiguity between real hatred and performance excellence makes this situation both compelling and genuinely concerning. Here's a question about wrestling realism: at what point does making threats seem too real actually hurt the product by making fans uncomfortable rather than excited? The fan reaction to these messages has been absolutely divided. Some viewers praise Moxley for creating the most intense and realistic threats in years, while others express genuine discomfort about the graphic violence described and the involvement of Heyman's family in the feud. The most controversial aspect is whether WWE should be promoting content where one performer threatens graphic violence against a non-wrestling personality. The power imbalance between an active wrestler and a manager creates ethical questions about glorifying violence against someone who can't physically defend themselves. But perhaps the most fascinating element is how Paul Heyman has responded to these threats. Instead of backing down or seeking protection, the wise man has been taunting Moxley publicly, suggesting that all talk and no action, and daring him to actually follow through on his threats if he has the courage. The decision to antagonize someone who is threatening extreme violence shows either incredible courage or complete delusion about the danger he's in. Heyman's willingness to poke the bear suggests he either doesn't believe Moxley will actually hurt him or has protection plans that haven't been revealed yet. The investigation into potential protection for Heyman reveals he's been meeting with various dangerous individuals who could serve as bodyguards. Speculation ranges from hiring private security to potentially recruiting a wrestler as his protector, creating storyline possibilities for shocking alliances. Here's a strategic question: who should Paul Heyman recruit as his protector against Jon Moxley, and would any wrestler be willing to stand between Moxley and his target? The most shocking theory is that Heyman is intentionally provoking Moxley to force WWE into sanctioning an official match with special stipulations. By making the situation so volatile that it demands resolution, Heyman might be manipulating circumstances to create the most profitable outcome possible. The testimonies from creative team members suggest this feud has forced complete rewrites of multiple storylines. Everything revolves around keeping Moxley and Heyman separated until the perfect moment, one insider revealed. The tension is so real that we're genuinely worried about what happens when they're finally in the same building. But the most devastating possibility is that when Moxley and Heyman finally confront each other, the result could be so violent that it changes WWE's entire approach to storyline intensity. If this feud delivers on its promises, it could set a new standard for personal hatred, translating to must-see television. The comparison to other legendary personal feuds throughout wrestling history is inevitable, but Moxley vs. Heyman might be the most intense because it involves a legitimate wrestler threatening extreme violence against a non-wrestling personality. The power imbalance adds uncomfortable reality to the threats. Here's a question for feud analysts: where will Moxley vs. Heyman rank among wrestling's greatest personal feuds, and does the non-wrestler aspect make it more or less compelling? The most important question is when and how this confrontation will actually happen. Will WWE book an official match with Heyman having a champion? Will it be an unsanctioned fight in that abandoned warehouse Moxley showed? Will it end with actual violence or a more traditional wrestling resolution? The investigation into potential match stipulations reveals WWE is considering everything from a street fight where Heyman has protection to a handicap match where Moxley faces multiple opponents defending Heyman. The creative possibilities are endless, but all involve significant violence. But perhaps the most terrifying scenario is that Moxley isn't waiting for WWE to sanction anything. His guerrilla-style messages suggest he's prepared to attack Heyman outside of official programming, creating unpredictable confrontations that could happen anywhere, anytime, completely unscripted. The testimonies from security personnel reveal they've been specifically instructed to keep Moxley and Heyman separated at all events. "We have orders to treat this like a legitimate security threat," one guard explained. "If Jon shows up where Paul is, we're to immediately evacuate Heyman and notify authorities." The most controversial aspect is whether treating this as a real security threat undermines the storyline or enhances it. When WWE security actually separates performers like they're genuine threats to each other, it adds realism but also raises questions about what's real and what's performance. Here's a final question about storyline authenticity. Does WWE treating Moxley as a genuine threat to Heyman's safety make the feud more compelling, or does it expose the predetermined nature of wrestling? The coming weeks will reveal whether Jon Moxley follows through on his dreadful messages and actually delivers the promised retribution against Paul Heyman. The anticipation has created some of the most intense buzz in wrestling because nobody truly knows how far Moxley will go. The wrestling world is simultaneously excited and uncomfortable about these threats, and Paul Heyman is caught between confidence in his manipulative abilities and genuine fear of Moxley's unpredictable violence. The lunatic fringe has returned with promises of destruction, and the wise man must decide whether to face him or hide. Jon Moxley has sent his message, Paul Heyman has received the threats, and the inevitable confrontation promises to be one of the most violent and personal in WWE history. The retribution is coming, and everyone is terrified of what happens when unstoppable fury meets manipulative intelligence in a collision that could redefine extreme wrestling.